Since the 1970s, when the import of large snakes from Southeast Asia became widespread and affordable, Burmese pythons started appearing in Florida. And why not? That was quite exotic. A snake from somewhere in Asia, decent size, no venom, basically the perfect pet. As a result, by the 1980s, the popularity of pythons had grown so much that they were sold in pet shops, and it shows. Lots of people wanted to get themselves such an unusual companion. Back then, no one had any idea the Burmese pythons in Florida were carrying something capable of wiping out many native species, drastically changing the state's ecosystem. So what exactly are we talking about? Let's find out today. So the Burmese python is an amazing exotic pet that fascinated a lot of people. However, many weren't ready for a snake that could grow over 16 feet long and gain almost 220 pounds. A housemate like that takes up way too much space. So many people came up with a brilliant plan, releasing pythons into the wild. On top of that, in 1992, Hurricane Andrew hit, destroying several breeding facilities and exotic animal centers, leaving a huge number of pythons on the loose. And you know, Burmese pythons loved being out in the wild in Florida. The subtropical and tropical climate, lots of water, and thick vegetation made for an environment very much like their home jungles. Meanwhile, the native jungles have no strong natural enemies, keeping the python population in check, and that's when their knack for rapid reproduction came into play. A female can lay on average between 20 and 50 eggs at a time, and in some cases, this number can even reach 100. Once the eggs are laid, the female wraps the eggs with her body, creating an incubation chamber and using muscle contractions to maintain the optimal temperature, which helps ensure high embryo survival. As a result, the snake population began to grow at an enormous rate, especially in the most suitable conditions of the Everglades. According to estimates by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, the population of Burmese pythons in Florida could be anywhere from 100,000 to 300,000. Some sources say there are only tens of thousands. The numbers may vary, but one thing is clear. There are plenty of giant snakes in Florida and the Everglades, and that's really bad news for the local animals. The invasion of Burmese pythons into Florida's ecosystem has dealt a crushing blow to the local wildlife, leading to a catastrophic decline in many species populations. These massive snakes are generalist predators capable of hunting a wide range of animals, and their insatiable appetite and hunting efficiency make them a perfect addition for pythons and a risk factor for every other creature in Florida. Between 1995 and 2020, researchers collected samples from 1,716 pythons and recorded them eating at least 76 different animal species across three major taxonomic groups: birds, mammals, and reptiles. In other words, a python literally eats anything that crosses its path, everything it can physically handle. Raccoons and opossums suffered the most. Think about it, these animals used to be regular residents of Florida and the Everglades, but once the pythons showed up, their numbers fell by over 99%. Marsh rabbits were also common, yet the Burmese arrivals turned out to be a catastrophe here too. Their populations dropped nearly 90%. All these creatures, once common across the marshes, became prime targets for the pythons and were powerless against the new predator. Pythons also actively hunt white-tailed deer, which are a key part of the food chain and serve as prey for local predators, such as the endangered Florida panther. A decline in the deer population puts extra pressure on panthers, making their already fragile situation even worse. Besides mammals, bird populations have also taken a serious hit. Pythons raid nests and hunt both wetland birds like white ibises and herons and those that live on the ground. Their ability to climb trees lets them reach nests that were previously out of reach for most ground predators. Even apex predators in the ecosystem, like American alligators, aren't safe from their attacks. There have been documented cases of large pythons clashing with alligators, and often both reptiles ended up dead from the fight. In this way, the Burmese python didn't just move into a new niche, it disrupted existing food chains, triggering a ripple effect whose impact on Florida's unique ecosystem is yet to be fully understood. Finally, there's also a threat to the community. Although attacks on people are extremely rare, the presence of giant snakes near residential areas raises legitimate concern. Pythons often enter private properties, hunting pets, including cats and dogs. This creates a direct threat to the residents' safety and peace of mind. turning an exotic wildlife issue into a real everyday danger. Maybe at least this is where the Burmese python's negative effect on Florida stops? No, because in 2012, local researchers found out the newcomers from Southeast Asia had brought a parasite that could kill all of Florida's native snakes. This is Raeliatiella orientalis. And if you think the creature looks like a worm, then yes. Though it's not actually a worm, it's a crustacean. That said, many people still call it a worm, so we'll follow the same approach. What do snakes have to do with this? These crustaceans are native to Southeast Asia along with Burmese pythons and are parasites of this snake species living in their respiratory tracts. The parasite's life cycle is complex and needs intermediate hosts. The worm's eggs leave the python's body with its feces and are eaten by small invertebrates. Then these invertebrates are eaten by bigger animals, like lizards or amphibians, which act as the second intermediate hosts. When a python eats an infected lizard or frog, the parasite's larvae enter its body, migrate to the lungs, and grow into adults, completing the cycle. For the Burmese python in its natural habitat, such coexistence is normal. Its immune system is adapted to the parasite, and the infection typically runs mild, not leading to severe disease. This balanced antagonism lets both the host and the parasite survive successfully without endangering each other. So, the crustacean is a natural element of the python's biology, not a lethal pathogen that kills off its carriers. However, when the worm arrived in Florida along with the Burmese python, things went in a completely different direction for creatures that had never in their entire evolution encountered a parasite living in the lungs. There's even a term for this phenomenon, parasite spillover, meaning a situation where a parasite is carried by an invasive species to local animals that had never encountered it before. When pythons settled in the Everglades, they started releasing parasite eggs into the environment, infecting local animals that serve as intermediate hosts in its life cycle, like lizards and frogs. Local snakes hunting their usual prey inadvertently swallowed the parasite itself. Unlike Burmese pythons, the bodies of native snakes were completely unprepared to deal with this invasive crustacean. Once in the lungs of a new host, the parasites begin to reproduce uncontrollably, causing severe pathologies. Infected snakes show a high intensity of infection. Their airways can host dozens, even hundreds of parasite individuals, whereas in Burmese pythons and their native range, the numbers are usually low. Such widespread infection causes serious damage to the lung tissue, leading to inflammation, internal bleeding, and severe breathing difficulties. Infected snakes become sluggish, lose their appetite and body weight, making them easy prey for predators and more vulnerable to other diseases. In the end, a heavy parasite load often kills the host. In June 2024, researchers examined 384 snake carcasses and 220 fecal samples, finding 66 infected individuals. This confirmed that the parasite is actively spreading across the state. Scientists have recorded infections in many local species, including garter snakes, water snakes, and even venomous rattlesnakes. Studies show that this parasite could be one of the main reasons behind the decline in some local snake populations seen in recent years. So, the invasive crustacean acts like a biological weapon unleashed by pythons, or to be more precise, by humans. The parasite undermines the health of entire snake populations from within, weakening the ecosystem and showing that the most dangerous effects of an invasion can be invisible at first glance, hiding in the fragile balance between host and parasite. Ecologists are particularly concerned that the parasite is the one reducing the number of indigo snakes, which are crucial creatures for Florida. The thing is, indigo snakes are the species that somehow manage to keep the Burmese python population in check. No, they don't eat the adults, but they feed on eggs and babies. And even that's a pretty effective way to impact the number of Burmese pythons in Florida. At the same time, these snakes' populations are already in trouble for many reasons. Their numbers are dropping due to habitat loss and people killing them. And now there's a parasite that can further reduce the number of indigo snakes. Overall, the species is really struggling. This, in turn, will make the damage pythons are causing to local wildlife, which is already suffering, even worse. Therefore, tackling the parasite is an important part of the broader strategy to manage the python invasion and preserve Florida's biodiversity. And you know, if ecologists in northern Florida and other states think that a parasite from Southeast Asia won't get to their snakes just because Burmese pythons don't live there, well, that's a problem. The thing is, infections have already been recorded in 14 Florida counties where the parasite wasn't seen before. What's more, the worm is turning up in snakes in the northern parts of Florida and even beyond, where Burmese pythons generally can't survive the winter. In other words, the parasite is no longer entirely dependent on invasive pythons as hosts, and there's also trade. As a result, animals can travel really long distances without even trying. In one case, an infected snake bought at a reptile show in Michigan had an invasive crustacean inside it, showing that a parasite can spread far beyond Florida this way. How is Florida dealing with such a dangerous parasite? Since it has a complex life cycle that includes intermediate hosts, directly wiping out the parasite in the wild is practically impossible. It's also worth noting that there are no drugs or methods that could be used on a large scale to treat wild snakes. Instead, the focus is on monitoring, early detection, and scientific research. The main tool is the Snake Lungworm Alliance and Monitoring, or SLAM. This is a coalition of universities, government agencies, and volunteers. They collect data on infection cases, map out where the parasite is found, and take samples from snakes. Citizens are involved in the search. If someone finds a sick or dead snake, they can report it to the experts, and it gets added to the database. This kind of citizen monitoring lets them track the situation faster and cheaper than scientists could do on their own. Scientists are also working on new tools. For example, a sensitive PCR test has recently been developed that can detect the parasite in live snakes by analyzing their feces. This is a step towards spotting outbreaks early. At the same time, lab experiments are being done to see which lizards and frogs can act as intermediate hosts. Understanding the life cycle is the key to finding ways to break it. Another focus is looking at how local snakes are affected. With the help of some funding, researchers are checking out how the parasite impacts populations of rare species like the pygmy rattlesnake. The goal is to figure out if this parasite is really behind the decline and if more resilient individuals can be found genetically. In the end, the fight against the parasite in Florida feels like reconnaissance so far. They're not wiping it out, just trying to figure out where it is, who it affects, and what weak spots it has in its biology. Only after that can real control measures be considered. However, there's now an active fight against invasive pythons, which brought the parasites to Florida. Every year, the state hosts the Florida Python Challenge, drawing hundreds of participants, from professional hunters to ordinary nature lovers. For many, it's become almost a sporting competition, but behind the flashy exterior lies a serious goal: reducing the number of predators. In 2023, during the challenge, they managed to catch 231 pythons, and in 2025, during a 10-day competition, 934 people from 30 states and Canada removed a record 294 pythons. There was even a winner who became a real nightmare for invasive snakes. He caught 60 pythons. Cash prizes are a good incentive for people. Thousands of dollars are awarded for the longest snake or the highest number caught. Media often report on record finds. For example, pythons longer than 16 feet or nearly 200 pounds, which become symbols of this fight. Besides amateur hunters, there's a whole army of professionals at work. The South Florida Water Management District and Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission hire hunters who get paid for every 0.6 miles of land they survey and for the snakes they catch. Since 2017, official records show that more than 19,000 snakes have been removed this way. There's also the Conservancy of Southwest Florida. Since 2013, a team of its biologists has removed over 20 tons of pythons from the Everglades and prevented about 20,000 eggs from hatching. Those are impressive numbers, but experts admit it's more about containment than eradication. Each female can lay up to 100 eggs, and tens of thousands of snakes are still out in the wild. Still, systematic removal at least helps ease the pressure on the ecosystem. To make hunting more effective, unusual methods are used. One of the most successful is the so-called Judas python. First, scientists catch a male python, then they put a radio transmitter on it and release it back into the wild. During the breeding season, it inevitably leads hunters to females and gathering spots where dozens of snakes can be found at once. There have been cases where, thanks to this method, nests with hundreds of eggs were discovered, and destroying them prevented an entire generation of new predators from being born. Scientists are also experimenting with dogs that can sniff out both adult snakes and clutches. For instance, one trained dog helped locate a nest that could have produced more than 100 young pythons. Just as much attention is given to involving local people, authorities constantly remind people not to release exotic pets into the wild and organize special amnesty days when owners can hand over a reptile to a special center without any fines. Lectures on the dangers of invasive species are held for school and college students, and the media turn the python challenge into a colorful spectacle, keeping public interest alive. The more people are involved, the higher the chance that a python sighting will be reported to experts quickly. Advanced methods are also being used, and sometimes they can be called really creative. One of the most unusual and eye-catching approaches has been the use of robotic rabbits designed to mimic the natural prey of pythons, marsh rabbits. These robots, costing around $4,000, can replicate not only appearance and movement, but also body temperature, scent, and even the sounds typical of real animals. They're equipped with cameras and motion sensors, which allows tracking the snake's reactions and luring them out of hiding spots where they would be almost impossible to find using traditional methods. In a 2025 pilot program, about 120 of these devices were deployed, and early results showed that pythons respond to the robots as if they were real prey, which greatly boosts the success of capturing them. Another promising method is using drones with thermal cameras, which is being actively developed by Vol Aero Drones together with Bill Booth Outdoors. Drones let researchers patrol large areas of the Everglades at night, spotting snakes even in thick vegetation or low visibility conditions. The thermal cameras pick up the snake's body heat, making them stand out against the cool surroundings. With these drones, scientists can not only locate individual snakes, but also identify areas where snakes gather, which were previously hidden from traditional trapping methods. This approach also helps reduce risk for people, since the operator controls the drone from a safe distance and the snake is detected without any direct contact. Radio telemetry is another key technology used to keep an eye on the python population. Scientists from the University of Florida and other research centers use GPS tags and accelerometers, which track the snake's movements and activity across different parts of the marshes. This data helps pinpoint where pythons are breeding and hunting most often, which makes it easier to plan targeted captures and egg nest destruction. For example, tracking males with radio tags during mating season lets hunters find females in hot spots of activity, greatly boosting control efforts. In the meantime, researchers are exploring options for long-term control. They're examining python reproduction and working on hormone baits that might attract snakes into traps. Ideas around sterilization and even genetic methods of population control are being discussed, but we're still a long way from actually using them. For now, these methods are experimental, with the main approach still relying on consistent mass trapping and egg removal. Sometimes the struggle takes on an almost dramatic edge. In 2022, a female over 16 feet long and weighing more than 200 pounds was caught in the Everglades. Inside her body, they found dozens of developing eggs, a striking reminder of how quickly these animals can multiply. Finds like this show that even a single missed snake can spawn hundreds more. Florida keeps pouring resources into this campaign, knowing that wiping out pythons completely is impossible, but every competition, every female captured with a clutch, and every new scientific tool helps ease their pressure on local wildlife. The fight isn't about total eradication, but about keeping the balance, giving vulnerable species a chance to survive alongside the new predator. In this sense, pythons have become not just a threat, but a symbol of how hard it is to fix a mistake once it's already rooted in an ecosystem. But Burmese pythons, along with their parasites, are far from the last non-native species brought to Florida that turned into a problem. In fact, they're not even the last creatures brought into the state as exotic pets and then released, causing a disaster for Florida's nature. These are green iguanas, which came from Central and South America. With no natural predators and plenty of food in their new environment, their population has exploded, especially in recent decades. This species is now officially considered invasive and is doing serious damage both to the state's fragile ecosystem and its infrastructure. The damage green iguanas cause to the local ecosystem is serious and multifaceted. Although they mostly eat plants, their diet can include eggs of birds and other reptiles, which puts local species at risk, especially those that nest in trees and bushes. Their heavy presence in places like parks, gardens, and areas along water bodies leads to major destruction of local vegetation. This not only takes away food and habitat from other animals, but also contributes to soil erosion. Moreover, iguanas can carry and spread pathogens like salmonella, posing a potential risk to the health of people and pets who might come into contact with their droppings or contaminated surfaces. The economic damage caused by the iguana invasion is also pretty serious, costing Florida millions of dollars every year. One of the most noticeable effects is their knack for digging deep burrows. They create extensive underground tunnels to lay their eggs, which can seriously damage building foundations, sidewalks, road embankments, dams, and seawalls, requiring costly repairs. Iguanas also do major damage to private property, munching on decorative plants in gardens and on golf courses, forcing homeowners and property managers to shell out money to replace them. In some areas, they've even started causing power outages, damaging transformers and electrical wires, which creates dangerous situations and leads to extra repair costs. In Palm Beach in 2020, reports showed that iguana activity led to $1.8 million in damage. Their digging tore through a dam controlling the water flow. The Florida government has recognized the scale of the problem and is actively urging citizens to help tackle it. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission intentionally doesn't list green iguanas as a protected species, which allows people to remove them from private property year-round. The only requirement is that it's done humanely. FWC actively encourages homeowners when they try either to cull iguanas themselves or hire licensed professionals to manage their numbers. Still, considering how quickly iguanas reproduce and adapt, completely wiping out this species seems unlikely. So the main goal isn't total eradication, but rather keeping their population in check and minimizing the damage they cause to the state's unique ecosystem and infrastructure.